Yes, that is right. I played my very first competitive Warhammer 40k game this weekend against an amazing Space Marine player, and oh man, I had probably the most funnest time I've ever played Warhammer before. The interactions I had with the Space Marine player, the lessons I learned, and some general information he actually taught me in the end of the game was phenomenal. And I generally think that the way I am now prescribed or been prescribed to see Warhammer is going to change not only the way I play, but also the kind of content I'm going to be uploading to this channel. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be like some huge change, but just the direction and how I speak is going to be a lot more influenced by this game, especially, and how exactly the competitive scene plays completely differently into the competitive casual or just casual scene of Warhammer 40,000. But yeah, in this video I'm just going to be running you through what exactly happened in the competitive game, not necessarily like inside the game, but more the lessons I learned outside, some interesting ways I'm going to be implementing the teachings of the Space Marine player, and a couple of interesting changes I'm making to my army, and a new announcement I'm going to be making about my general hobby and competitive side, or just playing side of Warhammer 40,000. But yeah, let's just jump straight into it with what exactly happened in the competitive game. Now, before I actually announce what's happened in the game, I just want to say that when I say competitive, it wasn't like a tournament game, but he was practicing for a competitive scene tournament, and he was playing in a competitive fashion. So the kind of way he'd be playing in a tournament would be very similar to this. So it wasn't technically an official competitive game, but it was a sense of, okay, I'm playing for a competitive way, and this is going to be a competitive game. Are you ready for it? And which I accepted, and we played a competitive way game, but not like an official competitive game. But yeah, basically the game was a Chaos of Space Marine Gladius Task Force detachment versus the Orcs with the Wild Tribe detachment. We were playing Take and Hold, and we were playing with Chilling Rain, so no mission effects at all, and I got absolutely smoked. It was a 70-35 loss, and he dragged me through the ground from round 2 onwards, and it was honestly absolutely hilarious. I was putting up a decently good fight in terms of, I was taking him with the anti-vehicles, I was putting up a fight with the command points. It was getting pretty similar at the start, but then after pretty much about round 3, he just dragged me through the dust, took off with that 70-point win, and I was left with the dust with 35. So it did go pretty badly for me, but I can easily see ways that I could have improved. This was only an 1,000-point game, by the way, so I wasn't playing with my full 2,000 points. It was only 1,000, so I didn't really have options for full kind of ways of playing, but that's besides the point. Anyway, I can easily see where I made mistakes. Example with my deployment, with the way I was scoring in the early game, and specifically how I positioned my truck. My truck was very wrongly positioned, and I understand that now, and I will definitely learn from the future. Basically, he was a fantastic player, the Space Marines player. He taught me so much about the game I actually didn't know, and he basically showed me these different ways I could be playing. And he'd never played against Orcs before, so it was a great experience for him to learn how Orcs operate with trucks and Mozrog and anti-vehicles and all the anti-monsters they have, and some decently good with sustained hits detachments. Yeah, basically, I would call myself a good player. I would say that I've been through a decent amount of games, and I have a lot of general knowledge about this game, how it works, and it's considering why I started this YouTube channel, because I believe that I have some skill to offer and some knowledge to share with you guys. But compared to these guys, I look like I started yesterday. I was absolutely garbage compared to these guys. They are like amazing players, and the thing is, the actual player I versed in the club was probably one of the worst, in his words, one of the worst players in the actual overall club. And apparently, one of the club players has actually been to the Australian championships for Warhammer, like the Australian whatever the Australia host for Warhammer he's been there. So it's crazy to think that there was such a massive skill gap between me and the lowest basically ranking player in the overall club. So it was crazy to think that me, who has some decent skill, compares to them very, very poorly. Now, besides all the fact that I lost absolutely horrendously, and there's plenty of places that could have improved, I learnt so much from this game that I want to share with you. I'm not going to go into detail about okay, round 1 this happened, round 2 this happened, round 3 the Ballistic Dreadnought destroyed me, but that's besides the point. I basically want to be going into what lessons I learnt from the game, and how you might be able to implement some of these really big teaching lessons, and how it's opened my eyes into going from Warhammer competitive casual into Warhammer competitive, and seeing how different phases open up. And how much more depth there is into Warhammer. Like, I knew there was depth, and I was aware of all the rules and how it works, but there is 10 times more depth. So let's just exactly jump into my very first lesson I learnt from this game. The very, very first lesson that I learned from playing this competitive game was that diverse repetition is the best way to get better at Warhammer 40,000, and even some things in your general overall life. Now, the more games you get in, the general more experience you're going to have. That's just common knowledge. The more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. So if you put in 5 games a week compared to 1 game a week, you're going to go have so much more knowledge on how the game works, how your army works, how you can position yourself in different directions of playing an army, and how you can use things like your stratagems or your enhancements differently on different characters, just purely from playing more than once a week, because you suddenly have so much more experience of playing. Even the same player gives you more experience because you're positioning yourself in a way that goes, okay, I've played this scenario 5 times more than if I had to play this 1 month. So I now know 5 different times more combinations than if I was to just play once a week compared to 5 times a week in the overall month span. So I believe that going from, basically for me personally, 1 to 2 games a month, like at max because of my busy schedule and how I was working, to dedicating at least 4 games a month or 1 game a week minimum to Warhammer 40,000 and getting better at it. But repetition is, I would say, not useless, but is very, very fatigued without the idea of diversity. You see, if you verse the exact same opponent over and over and over again, like I've had some similar-ish examples with my Tower player or with my Death Guard player, you get very complacent with that army. You become very stale, and you become very, okay, this is how Warhammer works. But once you jump into a completely new army, you realize that there is 10 times different ways to play Warhammer with that army. And that's only one army. And considering there's like 24 different armies in the game, it can be a nightmare having to verse all of them and getting to know all their different playstyles. So what I believe is that if you include diversity in your matchups, you will become such a better player. Because suddenly, you go from, okay, Warhammer's big on shooting, to versing World Eaters and realizing, oh, damn, melee doesn't suck. Melee is actually pretty strong, especially with an example of these guys. Or going into Votann or Tau and going, okay, shooting can be horrendously deadly. How can I build myself for that? And you start realizing that the way you built your list maybe wasn't the best for the open situation and more for the closed situation you've been placed in. So if you have a Friday night beer hammer with a couple of your boys or whatnot, and you're all running like a Space Marine detachment, or you're all got like a crazy stupid list like some Necrons, or you got Tau, or you got some Eldari or Drukhari or whatever, you're running all the stupid armies if you can, and you just play them, that's fine. If you play, honestly, more with that, you'll get better because you obviously have more experience of it, and with more experience comes more knowledge. But if you choose to play diversively, and you choose to throw yourself out there and verse different armies with different capabilities, with different skill levels, in different areas even, and different environments, you can play so much more differently. And you'll understand that the game doesn't just specifically work in this way, it works in many different ways. And it's about finding the best specific way for you. So if you combine these two together, of having the constantly new reinforced information from diversity, and the complete just general experience and knowledge you gain from the repetition, combine those two together, you have a immense combo for improving yourself in Warhammer so much more. So what I'm going to try and do from now on, especially with that, is I'm going to be organizing so many more games. So instead of just organizing, a monthly game or a game every week with my Tau friend or some other friends, I'm going to try and really invest into, okay, playing at the club, getting into other people, inviting people into my house. Now, yes, of course, I have played other people besides Tau, but the point is that having that large variety, that large pool of people to choose from, suddenly you go, okay, I'm not very good at versing Death Guard. Oh, I know a Death Guard player. Let's jump into there. How do they work? How does the -1 toughness, or how can I deal with -1 toughness? Is there a way I can improve? Oh, look, there is a way I can improve. And suddenly, your army's gotten that just a little bit better too, in the overall scheme of Warhammer 40,000. Because the Dream Army is an army that can basically counter every single army in the game. So we just need to basically include diverse repetition to get better. But yeah, that's the first lesson. Now let's move on to the second lesson I learned from playing this competitive game. The second lesson, or the big lesson that I learned from playing this competitive Warhammer 40k game, is that the dice doesn't like anyone. It doesn't just not like you, and it doesn't just not like the player you're versing. It simply doesn't like anyone, and it has a mind of itself and will happen whenever it likes to happen. Basically, in Warhammer, the dice simply represent a result, a percentile chance of something occurring in a session of 6. And you can calculate a heavy mathematical statistic of, okay, when X amount of dice is rolled and X amount of results are gained, you will sustain X amounts of results from the X amounts of overload you give it. But no matter how hard you basically theorize it can happen, in the end, that all comes down to a percentile chance. And percentiles can be 40% or 60%. Still doesn't matter. It's still a percent of happening. It won't guarantee to happen. So you should never, ever, ever base yourself off the dice roll. And this is what I was doing very wrong that the Space Marine player actually pointed out. I was positioning myself in a way that was forcing a heavy or very lucky dice roll to occur for that way, for my wage to happen. I'll give you a perfect example. Basically, I had positioned myself as Mozrog in 1 point to score and Stormboys in another point to score, and they needed to make a successful 9 and 7 inch charge both ways to successfully gain and take control of the objective points. Now, I failed both of those rolls, and I was confused. I was like, surely one of them would have made. But then I realized, after the Space Marine player explained to me, that I was relying so heavily on the fact that those dice rolls need to make that I gave myself no other options in terms to move back. So from now on, I'm going to be really, really trying to go, okay, how many positions do I have in this situation? I can do this, this, and this, and this. Okay, I need to understand that no matter how hard I want something to happen, it might not happen. So give yourself as many options as possible. Because if you go so heavily reliant on one option and go, okay, this has to happen or I lose, that is what's going to make you lose. You need to go, okay, this can happen, but if it doesn't happen, that's okay because I have X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z, and I have X, Y, and Z. The more options you have for a specific dice roll to happen, the more chances it actually is likely to happen. Just like in the game of Warhammer 40,000, the more actually attacks you have, the more likely they are to land on the number you want them to land on. But yeah, that is basically the second big lesson I learned from playing this competitive game. Simple state is never rely on the dice to make yourself. Basically, the lesson is never position yourself in a way that you have to win through dice rolling a specific number. Always position yourself in a way where dice can favor in your chance, but you have different ways of winning in the end. But yeah, that's the second lesson. Now I want to jump into what exactly I'm going to be changing in the future in my army, and a special announcement I'm going to make. It involves my hobby and how I'm going to be playing and uploading content to my YouTube channel. But let's jump straight into that. Now, what is changing? Basically, from all these lessons I've learned, I really want to emphasize some massive changes that I'm going to be creating in my orc army, but also a massive change in how I'm going to be actually entering into Warhammer itself. So, what exactly and how is exactly my orc army going to be changing? So basically, I am removing Death Killer Wartrike, 6 Warbikers, 1 Meganob, and 1 Painboy. The reason I'm doing this is all simply because all of them are too expensive for what they give. Death Killer Wartrike and 6 Warbikers take up too many slots that could be taken over by more hoardy units, like some more boys or beast snagger boys, and can be running more value, and generally just don't give me as much for tankiness as I wanted, even though they have that Feel No Pain. And I'm honestly just considering of not taking them in the first place and getting rid of Feel No Pain in a whole. 1 Meganob simply because I'm kind of sick and tired of taking blast on my Meganobs, and I want to get rid of that factor. And I can turn them from a tanky unit, simply back them off to a regular 3-man. I understand 3-man kind of sucks, but they're going to be a more just for their positioning themselves in a way that allows me to get that great dev wounds and perform the Ugg Chopper really, really well in the wild turn and previous turns, continuing that. And I'm also getting rid of my Pain Boy, simply because the 5-up Feel No Pain is not worth like 75 or 80 points or 90 points. I think it's 70 points actually he costs. And the point is, he just costs a bit too much for what he's giving. And without the Grot Assistant, which I can't seem to find, or I generally don't really want a proxy for, it doesn't really provide enough value into the boys, or any squad for that matter, to want him to make me take him. And plus, my Pain Boy also broke, so I don't really want to have to, take a broken model. But who is coming into my army in replacement of these characters? So, I'm implementing a Beast Boss and Beast Snag Up Boys. Now, I want to emphasize something heavily important. When I was talking about purpose in my previous videos, I still believe that purpose is crucially important for you to have a playable and honestly a lot more funner experience in Warhammer 40,000. But now I want to emphasize how much more important is taking meta units. I didn't want to take Beast Boss and Beast Snagger Boy simply because I wanted to have a bit more variety, but now I realize that Orcs are a horde melee army, and that's what they're going to be through and through. So Beast Snagger Boys and Beast Boss and Beast Snagger Boys are always going to be a must-take because you're implementing an even better horde army who's getting devastating wounds, who can move back, and consistent devastating wounds with cunning but brutal attachment added to it. So I'm taking these guys in response to getting rid of Death Killer, Wartrike, and whatever other units they could replace with. Now, I'm also bringing in Captain Badrock and 5 extra flash kits. Now, I have found someone who's going to be able to print Captain Badrock so I can officially have him without having to wait until, like, spring for him to come out, if he comes out with a new codex attachment. Let's hope he does anyway, so people can start having him. But I'm adding them in simply because the flash kits with Captain Badrock combo is just way too good to give up. They just provide that sustain hits. They get that -1 to hit. The full re-rolls with hitting on 4s with heavy is insane. And I honestly think they create such a massive amount of pressure from shooting, which I don't have to solely rely on my mech guns for. And they bring in this nice Overwatch threat, which my mech guns don't have because of the range they're taking up. And I'll be able to really supply some more flexibility into shooting and not just melee. And it'd be nice maybe to go a bit more heavily into the shooting side so my shooting boys can do stuff, but it wouldn't be too good from them. And I'm also adding in a Shock John Dragster. Now, why I'm adding him in is simply because I found that for an 85-point model who can teleport and show me how to shoot is going to be an actual distraction in which I'm looking for to place pressure off of Mozrog. So having a teleporting...
So, you may have realized that I just kind of like cut out halfway through speaking. That's because the footage actually got corrupt and I was only able to basically secure or take back the footage that I have in this video. And yes, I am upgrading my gear soon, so these problems will go away very shortly in my future content. But yep, hope you really enjoyed this video and I hope to catch you in the next one in whatever video I decide to post.